in a moment, I severed my left hand.
Oh, wow.
Not completely, but I sliced through all the tendons and the nerves at the wrist on the left hand. And they said, oh, you'll never move your fingers again. Because of my knowledge of anatomy and physiology, I had lots of people I could talk to, and they all said, look, you don't recover from these injuries. So I kept on asking, and eventually I found someone that worked in the field of the way the brain, the mind, and the body are all connected. I was like, okay, I'm listening.
Hey everybody, this is Rob Renee. Welcome back to the I Am Pain-Free podcast. We have a fantastic resource for us today. Dr. Phil Parker, correct, doctor?
Yeah, that's right, Rob.
So excited that you're able to join us. You have such an incredible background, and you've done a lot of interesting things that are really going to help people. So that's what I love, is learning stories and learning from people like yourself so that we can help educate the world on how to live a pain-free and then a vital life and a life of vitality instead of fatigue. I'm excited to dig into that with you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then what got you to doing what you're doing?
Okay, so I'm Dr. Phil. I have a PhD in the psychology of health, but my first training was as an osteopath, so working physically with people's problems. And the reason I became an osteopath was what I really wanted to do was to be a rock and roll guitar player. That was my dream.
I love it, really.
And my mum and dad said, yeah, you've got to get a proper job though. So I trained as an osteopath. And in my first year of training, it's a 4-year training, I was also running my side hustle as a musician in London, doing very well. And then one fine summer's morning, my life changed forever. In a moment, I severed my left hand.
Oh, wow.
Not completely, but I sliced through all the tendons and the nerves at the wrist on the left hand. And if you're both an osteopath, where you need 2 hands, or a guitar player, and you need two hands, it's a little bit of a disability in those professions.
Oh my God.
So I was rushed to hospital, and they said, okay, you've not died, so that's good, because you can very easily kill yourself doing that. But you've cut through these nerves, and nerves are like they're like the wiring of a house or a computer. They connect the brain to every other part of the body. And I'd cut the major nerves. And I said, how long until I can get back to playing the guitar? And they said, oh, you'll never move your fingers again.
What?
Why?
You're like, oh, hold on.
And in that moment, kind of my life changes. Everything I've planned to do involves using both my hands. What do you mean I can't move my fingers again? And I demanded, I was like 20, I think, nearly 21, demanded a second opinion. The second guy came along and said, I've got good news. I've had a look at everything. Good news is the first guy you saw was spot on. You will never move your fingers again. You'll be left with a useless claw.
Oh my gosh.
Not the answer I was hoping for.
Yeah, there's the good news out of that, right?
So I was like, okay. So I asked lots of people, because of my knowledge of anatomy and physiology, I had lots of people I could talk to, and they all said, look, you don't recover from these injuries. They're, very serious. Once you cut, that's game over. And I kept on thinking about lizards. Like lizards, they can lose a tail or sometimes a leg, and they can regrow it. It's like, a lizard can regrow a tail. Come on, it's got to be some way around this. So I kept on asking, and eventually I found someone who was an expert, a physio, but worked in the field of the way the brain, the mind, and the body are all connected. And she said, I think there's some things you can do that might help.
Nice.
I think you've got a chance of recovering. I was like, okay, I'm listening. What do I do? And she got me to do lots of exercises and take lots of vitamins and think differently. And for 6 months, nothing happened. Every time I tried to get my hand moving, it just didn't respond. I'd move and it just wouldn't move because the signal just wasn't getting through.
There, right.
And then one day I was in the lecture because I was still at college, and I went, I can't move. And the tiniest infinitesimal movement, my little finger, actually on this hand here, moved for the first time. It was like, oh, wow. It's like something's joined up here. That's not supposed to happen. This is good. Did that really happen? And I did it again. I could move it. The first time in 6 months, I had a little bit of movement.
Wow.
And so that really helped me to kind of go, if a bit is recovered, I wonder what else can recover. So eventually I recovered the use of my hands completely, taught myself to play the piano as well as the guitar.
Really?
I became an osteopath. I became a relatively successful guitar player. I played with Eric Clapton at one point, recorded lots of albums.
Hey.
So I did all that stuff. But one of
Multi-talented
the
Dr. Phil we
big
got right here.
one of the big effects of it was to really hone into this extraordinary ability that our brain and our mind have to influence the health of our body.
Ah, so
And both
true.
in positive ways, we can, and there's lots of research about this, we can affect our physical health by the way we think. So a good example of this is if we get embarrassed, we might blush. That's our thinking affecting the
Your
dilatation of the
physical body.
capillaries of the skin. Yeah.
Yeah,
Placebo effects, where we take a dummy pill and we get positive benefit as if we're taking medicines. But also there's something called nocebo, which is where you give someone a placebo, an empty pill, and they get the side effects of it as if they're taking the real medicine. Yeah. So they'll get stomach upsets and be sick and all this kind of stuff. So that's the other really interesting side is what is the power of people saying things like, you will never recover, or you'll have this for life, or you'll only get 70% better ever, which are the kind of conversations I'm sure you and your listeners have
yep,
heard many times along the
that's right.
road.
That's right.
And that may start making me think, what is the effect of that? Because I know the effect of that physio going, I think there is a way through, was really important to hear. Having someone going, I think there's a way through.
Right.
And I
Just to give
also
you that
knew,
glimmer of hope.
yeah, and I also felt the effects of loads of experts saying, you will never recover. And that made me interested in that. Also made me interested in who was I at 20 who went, I'm not listening to all these experts who are all telling me the same thing. What was driving that for me? What was that important? I think that was important. That I really needed to get, this is really significant for me.
Yeah.
And having somebody in my corner going, yeah, I think you can. All these things just made me super interested in this field. And then I spent the last 40 years since then looking at this whole space and going, well, what can we learn about this? Now, we can't fix everything, but the mind brain body connection is a real thing. It's well documented and researched. How can we hack into that? How can we harness that? How can we make that work for us? How can we use that to stimulate healing, to encourage the immune system, to reduce our sensation of pain, to improve the way our nervous system and body interact? And there's just like loads of stuff you can do in that space that will assist whatever else you're doing. Use everything that's of value. So if you're getting good medical advice, use that. But also remember the power of this onboard system is extraordinary. So for instance, if you are given medicine and you don't, say, trust the doctor or their diagnosis, or you don't trust the company, or you don't even like the color of the pill or the temperature of the room it was given to you in it, it sounds like madness, but this is what the research says. Those things will have an effect on how that pill affects your body. So
Wow.
if you
That's
don't trust,
incredible.
if you don't think the doctor's got the diagnosis right, it will have less of an impact. And this is all like really well researched stuff into what's called the specific effects, the effects of the drug, the medication, and the non-specific effects, which is like all the other stuff, like how your life's going that day, whether you think it's right, whether you trust yourself, whether you trust the doctor. Just so, for instance, I'll stop talking a minute, but in Italy, you did some studies on erectile dysfunction pills like Viagra, and they found that if they colored it blue, it had a much stronger effect on the men taking it. And the reason they think that that's true, because it was true, if the pill was blue, it had a bigger impact, is because the Italian football team is called the Azzurris, the Blues. So blue is connected to alpha male masculine manhood. And they think that's why people had a stronger physiological response to taking this particular pill. So there's all sorts of crazy stuff like that going on,
Yeah,
which
that
makes
is
you go,
fascinating.
okay, we need to rethink. The body is not a test tube. It's not like you put something in and everybody responds the same. Yeah, it's not that way.
Everybody, God made our bodies so wonderful and complex, right? That it's, I like to tell people that He designed it so incredibly that it's designed to heal itself, right? If we give it the right nutrients and the right things. But you're right, it's like everybody is so individual, right? We're all a unique, and we've also, I think, where we live and how we live and what we do to our bodies changes the way our body reacts, and then thus when you put something in, it may have a different effect than everybody else's because of the way that our surroundings and how we've treated ourselves up to that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a researcher, so I know a lot of the research into this. There's research in, like in Canada, if you live in a block that has 3 or more trees, it gives you the same health benefits as if you were earning $50,000 more a year. Like
Wow.
just having a tree around. Now, that may be because trees are good for you, or maybe the in more impoverished areas don't have trees, but there's a link between trees. There's also a link between living near the coast and health. That's just not random. There's a very, and how far you are to the coast or trees is a really important thing. Why the sea makes us feel more comfortable and reduces our stress. There's all sorts of research into that. It's quite extraordinary when you think about it, but at the same time not, because most people would go, yeah, I felt much better when I was in nature or when I was eating healthy. And there's also stuff like the way our genes are pretty stable through our lives, but the way they're wrapped up, so the bits that are on the outside of the kind of knot of the genes, which are active and working and telling our body what to do, the orientation, the way that knot is formed, is affected by stress levels. So under stress, they will change shape. How much plastic there is in the drinking water, what our nutrition is like. All these things actually have a really direct impact. It's not like like you're saying, it's not we are independent of the environment we're in.
Right.
Really the physical environment, but the mental, social environment. These things are all important.
Yeah, our bodies actually become what we eat, right? As well as what, like you said, what we drink, the actual minerals and the plastics that are in our water end up becoming into your body and they become you. I'm going through an interesting health issue, but for the last 90 days, I've been really focused on my nutrition, like ridiculously stringent, right? But it's amazing the transformation that's made in my bodies in even a 90-day period, right? And I've really transitioned my life to be eating to live rather than living to eat. And I think that's an important transition that people need to understand. Food is great, right? But at the same point, if we really treat our bodies like we should give it the nutrients it needs to live rather than eating just for pleasure. I think that's
Yeah, and I remember a guy was doing our training course, and he said, I wasn't sure if I could really get my head around the idea that the way you're using your brain, so the thoughts you're having, where you're pointing it, can really affect your health. And then he said, but then I thought, if in my refrigerator there was some rotten food and I kept on eating it, it wouldn't surprise me if I'm consuming that every day that I'd feel physically ill. So it's not really a stretch to think if I'm consuming fundamentally not very helpful ways of thinking that are stimulating stress or anger or frustration or upset, or making my body feel tense, that there won't be a physiological footprint as a result of that. I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And what's interesting is most people get that. Most people are like, yeah, I remember that time. I went to the interview, I was really stressed, my tummy was upset, I need to go to the bathroom, or time I was on a date and my heart was racing and I was like,
stressed out. Yeah.
Well, most people will know that feeling. Or when they go, you're not going to be able to go to the bathroom for the next 2 hours, and everyone's like, gotta go to the bathroom, gotta go now because there's no way I could last 2 hours. And normally they'll be fine. They sleep through the night, it's not a problem. But as soon as you tell them they can't do it, they gotta do it.
Yeah. It's amazing how powerful our mind is. So this is fun. I want to back up just so people maybe don't understand what your role is or what the term, what osteopath, is that correct?
Yes.
What does that mean to people who
So
don't
osteopath in the UK and the US are slightly different. In the US, osteopaths are medical doctors as well as osteopaths. In the UK, and I think in Australia, and a number of other countries, they are a bit more like physical therapists, except very holistic, and they see the body as a unit and they're looking at total health rather than just making joints move. They're going like, the fact that your joint or your muscle is not working will have an effect on your whole being, your whole nervous system, and that could have an effect on your organs or how you're feeling about yourself. But I'm actually no longer an osteopath. I retired last year. But
awesome.
For about 40 years I was practicing osteopath.
That's really cool. So what is the definition of an osteopath, just for people who don't know the term?
It's
you to explain that.
System of health. It's a system of health where you're looking at any interruption to physical wellness could affect your health. Okay. So if you have, say, a problem in the middle part of your back, it could give you pain, but it could also stimulate that particular part of your spinal cord. And that part of your spinal cord, the nerves from there, not only supply the sensation around your chest, but they also innervate the lungs and the heart. And so they can interrupt on how well your lungs or heart are working. And so osteopathy looks at how is this whole body working? And you talked actually some very osteopathic principles right at the beginning, because the original osteopath was a really interesting guy. I think he was born in Missouri in the mid to late 1800s. And so he was a minister of God, a doctor, and a mechanic, right? Because often people in those days, they had to multitask. So his view was a bit like you just said, like God was the great engineer, is how he saw it. So he was an engineer. So God is a great engineer. Any engineer would create a product, a machine, us being the machine, which could be fine-tuned in some way to get it back on track if it got a bit out of true, and it would work well if you could remove the obstacles for it being how it was designed according to its blueprint. So those are some of the kind of founding ideas.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you for that clarification. It's great to understand the terminology, right? Make sure we understand.
Yeah, that's a very brief. There's lots more.
No, I get it. You spent 40 years learning it, so I'm sure you could talk for hours on all different aspects, which is super fun. But I'd really like to spend a little bit of time on.
Hey, I've got builders in. They have just triggered the smoke alarms.
Oh,
so
fun.
we might have to pause this just for a second until that stops. There we go.
Okay, good. Sounds good.
Standing somewhere, something in the house.
That's our perfect cue to talk about fatigue. One of the things I really want to spend a few minutes on is I know you've done a lot with fatigue and helping people with that problem. As the more research I'm doing, it's just incredible how many people are living in either chronic fatigue or just fatigue in general. And I think it's getting worse because of our environment and because of the ultra processed foods that we're eating. And it's just like things like everything's against us, right? The water's bad, the air's bad, the food is bad. And it's just causing an epidemic of people with lack of energy. And one of the big missions I have is to help people get through that. And I know that you have spent a lot of time and effort on that particular area. So I'd love to spend a few minutes talking about that.
Yeah, so I started working again 40 years ago with people with hard to help issues, because I trained as an osteopath and I realized that people would come to see me often with physical health problems. And quite often there are other stuff going on in their lives that was part of the cause of the physical problem. So I trained as a psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, coach, NLP practitioner to kind of work with the cognitive and emotional aspects of health,
Nice.
as well as the physical stuff. So I combined those two things. So a lot of people come to see me going, hey, I've seen someone else. They say, go see Phil because he's got these extra skills. Because most people live in one camp or the other. And I was very interested in both these things because of my own history. And so I'd work with people particularly with chronic fatigue, and I found I couldn't help them. Nothing seemed to work. You'd change their diet and they go, oh, a little bit better. And then you'd do this, and, oh, a bit better, but now it's gone back to normal, going back to how I was before. And so after a while, I stopped working with them because I thought, I'm really not adding anything here. And then I developed this thing called the Lightning Process, which is a training program that helps people to really access the mind-body connection that we were talking about before, how your brain, your food, and your body are all linked. So it's a training program. It's fundamentally learning about it, doing a 3-day seminar, and now having support to put the tools into practice. And it's really successful. But at the early days, we were just figuring it out, working with clients, going, what can we do? And I was getting great results, really good results with people with long-term problems where their blood was clotting and nobody knew why, or their immune system was failing and nobody knew why, or they lost the use of their legs. And so I was helping people do all this kind of stuff. And there's
Love it.
That stops. Gonna have to do some great editing on this, Rob.
Yeah, exactly. That's good.
Okay.
Thank goodness for good editing.
So I was working with these people and I was getting some good results. And then somebody came to see me with chronic fatigue and they said, could you work with me with chronic fatigue? And I was like, actually, I'm getting quite good results. And my experience with chronic fatigue is really difficult to fix. So no, I'm not gonna work with you because I just don't think it's gonna work.
Right.
But they kept on hassling me and saying, come on, I won't tell anybody if it doesn't work. Please give me a try.
Give me a try.
Like, all right, okay. let's see. I wasn't very hopeful because my previous experience hadn't been
Yeah.
very positive. But we did it, and the next day they were better. And I was like, it probably won't last because that's normally what happens. But they stayed well, and they started referring their friends, and their friends got. I was like, this is strange because this is not the normal response. Normally you get a kind of,
Right, right.
So after a year following these people up, they'd all made big change and maintained their changes. And people started to hear, a couple of people wrote books about it, people started to hear about it, and we saw more and more people. So in the last, this is nearly 26 years ago now, we've seen over 75,000 people around the world in, I think, over 20 countries, and every continent apart from Antarctica. People have trained using the lightning process to use their brain, mind, body to make extraordinary changes. So that's people who've got mild fatigue getting well, people with severe fatigue so bad they're in wheelchairs or lying in bed in the dark being fed through tubes to feed them, who've had it for 6 months, who've had it for 25, 30 years. People who are young, people are old. We train it in different languages, and the results are pretty robust. Not everybody, it's not right for everybody. It doesn't get the results everybody wants. Very few things do, but
Yeah, exactly.
the results are, so we've done a lot of research. The research was a randomized controlled trial that we did with chronic fatigue that said that when you compare it to just doing specialist treatment for chronic fatigue, when you add the lightning process on top, the people who have the addition of the lightning process get statistically significant changes in their fatigue, their pain levels, their anxiety, depression, their back to school, because it was with adolescents. So some major changes helping people to finally get their lives back. And this is what we've seen over the last 26 years, that people can get their health back. It's quite amazing.
That's beautiful. I love that story. On this lightning process, I know it's a 3-day process, but can you summarize it at all for us
Yeah, so fundamentally it's based on neuroplasticity, which is a term you and your audience may be familiar with, but sorry, I'm a bit sniffy, I just had a cold. But neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change and learn dependent on what happens. So basically, if your brain practices a particular pathway, the more it uses it, the stronger and more powerful that becomes. And pathways we use less fade. So that's why we remember things that we do a lot of the time, and things we haven't thought about for a long time are a little bit more difficult to remember. So neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to learn and change. And the lightning process is based on neuroplasticity. It says, okay, what we need to do is we need to work out what pathways, what kind of patterns, pathways, what nerve groups we're triggering that are maybe not helping our health, that may be getting us into physiological states that suppress our immune system, that make our hormones not quite work in the way or be released in the way that we want them to. And what can we do to do the opposite, to move into pathways that assist our health? And that's on every level. So that could be, okay, my legs, I haven't walked for a long time, my legs are deconditioned. I need to re-stimulate the muscles and re-stimulate the neural pathways. I also need to deal with the fact that somebody told me I'd never walk again. That would have a big effect as well. I need to look at my optimism. I need to look at the stress in my life. I need to look at the trauma in my life. Or any of these things, all these things could have an impact. No one person's the same. So some people have no trauma. Some people have no negative expectations. But after a while of being ill, you start to gather some of these things. And it's helping people to find their way to, right, what is getting in the way? What's switching on pathways that aren't helpful? And how can I switch off those pathways and switch on the pathways that would help me? Again, if we look back at the placebo effect, often it's dismissed as going, no, it's just the placebo effect. No, let's not dismiss that. What we're saying is, we gave you a dummy pill that contained nothing, and suddenly you got well. Your physiology changed. It's not you thought you were well. And this is the case even with Parkinson's. They've done some great studies with Parkinson's where they give people a dummy injection of the thing that helps people reduce their Parkinson's symptoms. And under certain conditions, they will respond as if they had the real injection. Their tremors will stop, their muscle tension will change. So we know there are real physical changes, physiological changes as a result of taking placebos. The only thing that's active when you take a placebo is this link between the body and the brain. So it's like, how do we use that? How do we help
They
people?
harness it, yeah.
Yeah, so we teach people how to do that, how to notice. So really simply, be aware, how to be aware of when you're triggering pathways that aren't useful for you. Right? So when you're getting into bits of neurology that are not helpful, and there are incredibly loads of ways that we can find ourselves in the wrong state. One of the interesting things is the name of your podcast. I am pain-free, because the word pain, in some interesting research studies, shows that every time you use the word pain, it lights up the neurology of pain.
Yeah.
Even if you say pain-free, the brain still hears pain. It's a bit like saying to a dog, hey, I'm not going to take you on a lovely walk today. The dog's like, walk?
Yeah.
It's excited, yeah. Our brains are the same. So even looking at things like language, right? So becoming aware of lots of things that are interrupting normal health, then working out, okay, how do we pause that? Then how do we redirect ourselves? How do we change our relationship to ourselves so we're kind to ourselves, so we're compassionate, so we're encouraging healing, so we're steering ourselves in the good direction? Because, when you've been ill for a while, you can get into a bit of a rut in thinking and operating, limiting. The conversations you can have are not always really empowering. It's completely reasonable. It's completely normal, but not very healthy. So how do we make those changes? Yeah.
That is so cool. So does that summarize the lightning process?
Yeah, so a lot of it is all about how do we move from pathways that aren't useful to pathways that
are useful.
And learning how to do that in a kind way. It's really important when we do that, and I'm sure you talk about this a lot, that when you're looking at, okay, what is my role in this? How can I become empowered in this? That we, at the same time, make sure there's no conversations about you're to blame for this. Instead, it's, this is just what's happening. The question is, what do we do? How do we move forward? So it's not going, oh, you shouldn't have done that. These things happen. We all get ourselves into patterns and ways of operating and thinking that are useful. How do we move it gently and compassionately? Because compassion is super important in any change process. And then finding a way that works for us to do that, to find our own dance that we can move along to that really makes sense to us.
That's beautiful. So I love that, just in respect that if you look at your history and what got you into the whole thing is really the basis of what you ended up using to create the lightning process, right? It's okay, I've cut these nerves and they're telling me, no, you're not going to have use of that hand again. And you're like, I don't prescribe to that. I'm going to figure out another way. And you were stubborn enough, which I'm so excited. I'm so glad that obviously 75,000 people later were blessed by your stubbornness to say, no, I think there is a way. And it's fascinating that you're talking through a way to help people really naturally, right? And holistically, in the respect that you are helping them with a really severe, at times, a physical condition of chronic fatigue. And you're able to work with them on, okay, what are the stressors that are maybe causing portions of that? And then how do we reprogram the brain to, and maybe, like you said, those pathways to your legs so they'll walk again. You're reprogramming those and you're doing a neuroplasticity to get those things firing, like your hand. Remember when you were talking about your hand? It was like, oh, hey, it moved, right? And it finally started moving. They're like, oh my gosh, something's connecting. So if you do the mind-body connection and you improve that pathway, and I like to think of it as like a vein, right? The vein is clogged with crap, and then you clear that vein, all of a sudden, you get clear flow of information. My mind brings that analogy to when you're doing the neuroplasticity. It's like plugged, and then all of a sudden you drill a hole, and now it's no longer plugged, and you can connect to that. So that's just beautiful that you're able.
Also, your experience as a runner, peak athletes will tell you train physically, you train dietary, and you've got to train mentally. You can't miss that out, because at the start of the race, it's not the person who's most physically trained. Those things are super important, and the most nutritionally trained. But if you're thinking, I'm never going to win this race, you won't win that race. Everybody at that level knows that those things make a huge difference. So why not bring some of that into thinking about our health? If it makes a difference to people's peak physical performance, then what difference would it make for our health?
Yeah, so true. That's just amazing. So this has been fascinating, Dr. Phil. I really appreciate you taking so much time with us. And how do people get a hold of you to learn more about your program? And then are you doing that? You said you retired about a year ago. Is that what are you doing?
I still deliver the program a bit. I
Okay.
mostly do this kind of stuff, write books, do podcasts. But go to lightningprocess.com. That's lightning process.com. But if you
Okay.
spell it any other way, you'll find it as well. Look
Hey,
for me, philparker.org. Go on all the podcast channels, you'll find me with my own podcast series talking about all this kind of stuff. There's one on the mind body research and on the lightning process and all this stuff. So, yeah, you can
yeah,
find me.
that's exciting. So we'll make sure we have the links on the show notes as well so that people can find you. It's just really fascinating. But I really appreciate you taking so much time with us, and you're a fascinating man. I'm sure I'd love to have you back on and talk more details about a lot of these things because we could probably talk about them for hours, but it's just really fascinating. Thank you for giving us the insight into the lightning process and how you're truly helping people go from a problem that you didn't think you could solve. And then all of a sudden, 75,000 people later, you obviously found something that worked amazing for people. So thank you for what you do. And I appreciate you being on the I Am Pain Free podcast.
My pleasure, Rob.
Anything else you'd like to say in parting?
No, just I guess I would say if you're listening to this, and probably many people are, because either they have fatigue issues or pain issues, or they have a family member who does. The thing I would say is there are ways through. It doesn't have to be using my method or Rob's method, but there are ways through. Because if one person's found the way through, it means there is a pathway, and it's finding the right one for you.
Awesome. I love it. Give people hope. That is such an important aspect. And I just fascinated with the mind body connection and all the things that you're doing. So God bless you. Thank you so much for being on the
My
show.
pleasure.
All
Lovely
right.
to see you.
As many of you know, my focus at the I Am Pain Free podcast is help as many people get pain free as possible. And we strive to use all natural and alternative therapies to accomplish that goal. Well, today I'm thrilled to introduce to you a revolutionary product that aligns perfectly with our mission of natural health and well being. It's called Exodus by Exodus Strong. At Exodus Strong, their mission is to help you break free from the grip of big pharma and embrace natural solutions that promote vibrant health. With a foundation rooted in the wisdom of the Bible, the all natural supplement harnesses the power of 7 key ingredients specifically mentioned in the scriptures. The flagship product Exodus is designed to be transformational, providing benefits such as energy enhancement, stress relief, blood sugar stabilization, pain relief, and anti-inflammation. So join the movement, right, to help them get 1 million new people to read the Bible every day and transform their health naturally. When you purchase Exodus, use code IAPF at checkout to receive a special free gift with your order. It's time to exit the old you and step into a new chapter of vitality and well-being. To get there, you go to exodusstrong.com. So it's Exodus, EXODUSSTRONG.com. And check out and use that IAPF for the I Am Pain Free podcast. And then you'll experience the benefits of the Exodus mineral blend. This mineral blend is amazing. It's got the molecular hydrogen generating formula that's backed by hundreds of scientific studies. So begin your journey feeling great and looking great. Don't miss the opportunity to take control of your health with the all natural way. So go check it out. I think you'll really enjoy it.